Nearly 2.2 billion people live without running water access at their homes. It's like 1 in 3 people across the world. In sub-Saharan Africa, the situation is even more grim. Like just under 25% of urban households have access to piped water. CityTaps is solving this in a unique manner. And to talk more about it, we have the founder and CEO, Grégoire, with us today. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Greg.
Thanks, Naman. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we do.
Awesome. So we'll start with the water crisis problem. So we keep hearing and reading about it. I got to know more about it through some of the documentaries that I saw on Netflix recently. But you are very well into the situation because you are solving it. So we would love to know more about what are your thoughts on the crisis, on the water crisis.
So first, I want to say that there is no water crisis.
Okay.
Right. There's no such thing as the water crisis.
Right.
There's lots of big water crises. Right. One of the tricky things about water is that it's a word that doesn't mean anything. Like it's like music,
right,
or religion, or it's like a meta word, right, or poetry, right? Water. When you say water to someone, they can think about a stream in the mountains, or they can think about, the sea, or they can think about the water coming out of the tap, or they can think about a factory in which drinking water is made. They can think about a sewer, and so they can think about a god, that is water related. And so it really doesn't mean anything in some ways, right? And yet it means everything at the same time, right? It's one of those macro ideas. And so in the same way, water on our planet operates at very different scales, the atmospheric scales, the continental scale. You've got ice sheets the size of continents. You've got rivers that are the size of that have river basins the size of continents. And then you're dealing with, very small scale problems with one community that doesn't have water for reason X, Y, Z. And so compounding all these things together, droughts that are the result of climate change and possibly of other effects, with snow melt in the American Sierras and in the Himalayas, and then how that ends up impacting Mr. and Mrs. so and so at the very end. It's really a chain of crises,
right?
And it's very important to understand that the solutions that operate at one end of the chain are definitely not going to do anything at the other chain, right? So climate change and the impact on rainfall patterns, for example, is going to have an impact on sort of macro scale, availability of water inside a river basin.
Right.
But even with a lot of water in the river basin, for example, in the Congo River, right, which still has a lot of water, you might still not have people with water at home because the infrastructure that's needed in order to serve people at the last mile and even the last 10 centimeters, right, of the chain isn't there. So, whereas it's important to protect the environment and to make sure that there's no pollution of our water bodies, and that we stop heating the world, and that we go back to the patterns that make sense to the extent that that's even possible, which I understand it's not in the long run. So we need to adapt. In the end, there at the scale that we're working at, which is, do these people have water in their house? It's really it's a different set of problems, and it's a different set of solutions. So one of the things that I try to be speak about as often as possible is to make sure that we don't conflate all these problems and artificially sort of limit the scale. And like with a camera, when you the optics, you can flatten the image so much that you lose the depth. And I think it's important to make sure that that depth remains um, uh, touchable by people. And to a large extent, the press, when you read articles about the drought in the American West, for example,
Yeah.
they tend to shove all these scales together. The snow melt, the almond farmers, and the guy who's watering his lawn in Fresno, California. And those are just not the same scales. Like you shouldn't be talking about those things in the same article, really.
Got
right?
Got it.
So, but you got to sell papers, so you write this, and it sort of, I think, confuses the situation a little bit. And I'm thinking of a specific article in my mind when I say this, by the way.
Okay. I mean, it's an interesting take on water. I never thought about it. I mean, makes me think about electricity and logistics for some reason. Like, logistics has always the last mile connectivity problem.
Yeah.
And electricity, like distribution, generation and distribution are two different things, and we cannot talk about them together really. So yeah, I mean, thanks for explaining it to us in that way. Appreciate that. Yeah. And how are you solving? What part of it are you solving at CityTaps, and what are some of the regions that you are focused on?
So CityTaps' vision is running water in every urban home.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do is ensure that no woman or girl child, because that's usually who's doing it,
Right.
is getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and walking in the streets to get some water from some far away or not so far away, standpipe, public access point,
Right.
and then lugging literally something that weighs a ton per cubic meter back to their house, as if this was still the Middle Ages. And so we want these people to be able to do what you and I do, which
Right.
is just turn a tap and really never think about where that water's coming and whether it's safe to drink, et cetera, et cetera. And so the way that we do that is that we try to help the utilities, the organizations, most often companies, that are responsible for providing that service to people.
Okay.
And so we have developed technology that helps, helps with the relationship between the end users, the subscribers, as we like to call them, and the utility itself, and to reestablish the flow of money in the opposite direction to the flow of water. Because you need water to go this way and money to go the other way, so that the utility has the means to continue to invest and to continue to maintain what is objectively a giant factory. Right? So you have the factory that produces the water, pipes going all over town. Right. It's massive, right? You've got pumps and dosing sessions for stations for dosing stations for chlorine, water towers, people running around, motorbikes, cars, tools, paper clips, computers. I mean, it's costly to provide water to people, right? It's not the water itself that people are paying. Right. It's not the water itself that people are paying for. It's the service of having water in their house.
Yeah.
So we try to smooth that relationship by making it very easy for people to pay very small amounts, so a pay-as-you-go solution, so that the utility can have the money that it needs in order to provide services. And it's a long shot. It's a long game, right? It's going to take probably a generation for us to get anywhere, right? Okay. But that's what we're trying to do. And so right now we have projects running in 7 countries around the world, in Ecuador, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Niger, Kenya, Rwanda, and Namibia.
Okay.
I don't think I'm forgetting anything. And Singapore, sorry, which is definitely not having the same problems.
Right.
And the idea is to help the utility be better at what it does. And at the same time, we're very humble, and we realize that it's only a tool, right? And you can give someone a hammer, it will not make them a carpenter. Right. So the tool has to be the right tool for the job, and it has to be something that they've decided that they want. And so, it's turned out a couple of times that we've said, you know what, we actually don't think you need our solution. I think you have other problems that you need to address first. And, because our vision, right, is running water in every urban home. It's not sell a bunch of water meters. Right? right? So, and the other part of the equation of the crisis that we're trying to address, it's a really sort of sad part of this crisis, in my opinion. It's the money crisis.
Okay.
Because it costs money for people to have water in their house, and the World Bank has found that the amount of money that's needed to reach SDG 6, which is the one that has to do with water, is $114 billion a year.
Okay.
Which is both a very large number and a very small amount of money.
Yeah.
Right? Because there are literally trillions of dollars invested at negative interest rates in German government bonds. So it's not like there's no money out there.
Right.
Right? But the money is not going, it's not flowing towards the water, if you'll allow me to make a bad joke. Yeah. So in order to reestablish this flow of money, our solution also, because all the payments are digital, because all the payments are traceable, we are working with investors right now who want to invest in the water utilities,
right,
and securing their investment with our solution.
Okay.
With the cash flows generated by the subscribers. And it's really beneficial because it means the very people who are benefiting from the investments are the ones actually paying for it,
right,
with the help of investors,
right,
with the help of government subsidies and There's no idea that I don't subscribe to the idea that people should pay 100% of the investment and operating costs, especially when they're very poor, right? But that's allowing the utilities to basically grab hold of their financial destiny. And that's really important if we're ever going to get anywhere. And I'm very happy to say that we signed a contract last week in Kenya along those lines with a private finance partner, with us as the solution provider and the utility, and this sort of triangle of responsibilities, and where our technology is ensuring that the investor will get repaid.
Got it.
The game changer in the water sector, because it significantly reduces the risk that the investor is taking in lending money to an organization which typically is not creditworthy. Most water utilities in the world are not creditworthy. And that's the unspoken part of this water crisis, right? The utilities need to be able to finance the very expensive investments that are necessary. They need to be able to pay salaries, they need to be able to pay maintenance, etc. And they often lack the funds. And so our solution is also helping solve that problem.
Okay.
It's not very romantic. It doesn't sound very heroic. It sounds kind of like nitty-gritty and stuff, and that's because it kind of is. But in the end, we live in a capitalistic world, and we have to sort of fight the battle with the weapons that are at their disposal, and that's the weapon we have right now. And in the end, it means people having water in their home, and that's really the goal, right? That's what we want to get to in the end.
Got it. Okay. I would love to, dive deeper into the pay-as-you-go solution that you have built at the consumer end, at the household level, which also helps to keep these water companies or the infrastructure companies, get their payments on time. So can you talk a bit more about that? How does that work? And how does that help the households and the water infrastructure companies at the same time?
Yeah. So first of all, you sometimes have a water infrastructure company that owns the infrastructure, and sometimes a water utility that operates the infrastructure. And sometimes it's the same thing.
Okay.
Just
no, that's an important point.
And very often the asset ownership is with the government.
Okay.
But the money required for the investment comes from the operating company, because they're the ones who are generating the revenue.
Got it. Okay.
So it's a bit tricky. And very specific to this field in this sector. Right. So our solution lets people pay as they go for water, which is to say that they can make micropayments on a daily basis if they want. They could pay, 10 US cents, 15 US cents to have water at home from the water utility. So it's a water meter with a valve in it that will close if you are out of credit. So you top it up just like a prepaid phone, a pay-as-you-go phone, right? And just like a pay-as-you-go phone, you get charged at the moment of your consumption. You don't buy a bunch of water the way that you do with an electricity meter, which is prepaid, right? Electricity meter, you buy a bunch of kilowatt hours, right? At the spot price of electricity at that time.
Right.
But there's no spot price for water. What there is instead is a somewhat complicated step tariff, where the first 6 cubic meters cost this much, the next 20 cost that much, and then so that's really complicated, and that's part of CityTaps' secret sauce. I've actually figured out how to do this on a prepaid basis, which is in fact a pay-as-you-go basis.
Got it.
So there's a subtle difference between the two, and our ability to actually match that step tariff, which you find in most utility companies around the world, is part of our thing, right? And so people are able to pay, just the right amount according to their budget.
Yeah.
And for example, if they have a leak, they don't get, they can only run up a tab up to the amount that they've prepaid. Right. With credited to their account. They don't end up saddled with a huge bill at the end of the month, or 2 months later if the person doesn't come to read the meter for 2 months. And all of a sudden it's a crisis. It's a crisis for the subscriber who has to come up with $200 that they've never had that much money in their life, perhaps, right? And for the utility, who's going to end up with no little choice to either disconnect the subscriber and therefore lose a customer, which is not a good. No business can run like that, or forfeit the amount of money that they're owed, which is no fair because they had to pay to. It costs money to produce it, ship it, deliver it, etc. So they don't want to forfeit that money, and so you're in sort of this crisis, right? So instead, we turn off the water when the credit's over. You top up. Oh my God, it's going so fast. Maybe there's a leak in my house. We send you a leak, and on your mobile phone, a little alert that says, hey, so, and people fix their leaks, and then everybody's happy because the utility has more water to serve other people. Right? So that's one way in which the people benefit. Also, if you've been disconnected because you had accrued this $200 or $100 arrear, you can now repay it through an individualized repayment schedule with the utility. So you might repay 10 cents a day for 1,000 days, or $1 a day for 100 days, depending on what your means are. And the utility can come up with a deal with you. And obviously, they're not sending somebody every day to collect 10 cents from you, because that doesn't make any sense in any country, right? Not to mention the rest of the money might just evaporate. So instead, it's being debited in very, very small amounts from your water credit, and that's very comfortable. And we've seen that in Niger and in Kenya, people who are very much at the bottom of the pyramid are able to become customers of the utility again, subscribers of the utility, and to be basically their best subscribers because they're paying in advance and they're repaying that arrear that they had accrued. And so now the utility has an incentive to serve them even better than everybody else. And they have regained the dignity that comes with not having debt, with having repaid everything, having water at home, the convenience, the value proposition, because if you don't have water at home, you'll typically pay 10 to 100 times more per cubic meter. Right? And, and you'll have to spend, 2 hours a day, and you'll get sick because the water that you put in your jerry can, the jerry can is probably contaminated with bacteria, even if the water is clean, which is hypothetical. And you can never carry enough water for your whole family, right? So you're going to end up reusing water that you took your bath in to do the dishes. And this is what people do when they cope, right? And that's not a way to live. Right? This is it's 2021. It's not 1542, or something. Like we need to, people need to be able to bathe. So
it's hard to imagine.
And for the utility now, the money's coming in advance. If I reconnect someone, I know they're going to pay me back. And also I'm going to have data to help me solve my leakage problem, because it's a smart meter in addition to being a pay-as-you-go meter. And that means, that what's called non-revenue water can go down, and it means more water for more people. Which in resource-constrained environments, which is most of the cities in the developing world, there's just not enough production, right, to serve everyone. It means more revenue for the utility, but more importantly, it means more water for more people.
Right.
Which is what got us in this business in the first place.
And that sort of moves me into my next question. Like, what exactly motivated you to start CityTaps?
So I've worked in the water sector, I'd say since about 2004, 2005, maybe 2002. It depends how you count exactly.
Okay.
And I've worked all over the world, Peru to the Philippines, Poland to Malawi. I've been very lucky, and I've seen a lot of things, and I've seen a lot of suffering,
Right.
from people, and women in particular, who have this basic, really sort of fundamental need, and my wife says that when she met me back in 2003, I had just moved back from Uganda,
Okay.
a couple of years, a few months before, and she said that I was already talking about how we're going to solve this problem, how we're going to, and I don't remember this, by the way, she says that, and I worked then for a number of water companies, as a consultant, and inside water utility companies, and learned a lot about the field. And I realized that the problem was at this nexus of money and technology, right? At the money and water. And you really needed to have the water go in one direction and the money go in the other direction, as I said earlier.
Yeah.
And only when you did that would the utilities have the capacity to actually do what they're supposed to do, and what the vast majority of them want to do, which is serve 100% of the people 100% of the time. So I've had the privilege of traveling a lot and seeing this firsthand. I'm also a feminist, and I think that it's an outrage. I mean, there's no other word for it, that women and girls are spending, enough time to build the Empire State Building, 700 times over, carrying water. I mean, for God's sake, how uninteresting is that? Right? I mean, what are you doing with your time? So I think people deserve, better. So I asked myself at one point, what am I going to do about this? And so I came up with this idea. I put together a team. I proceeded. I have qualities. I have, qualities as a human being, and I have flaws as a human being. One of my qualities is that I'm incredibly ambitious and tenacious. So this is really difficult to do. I'm also kind of a megalomaniac in a way, right? So I'm like, okay, worldwide problem, let's go solve it, right? I mean, some people would be like, are you out of your mind? And some people do say that to me, and I am, I guess, a little bit out of my mind. But hey, if we don't solve this problem now, then exactly what are we waiting for?
Right.
And if we don't do it, then who exactly is going to solve it? Because I don't see, there's not like 1,000 people lined up behind me trying to solve this problem, right? So we at CityTaps believe that we have this sort of mission that is a bit grandiose. I'll grant you that.
Yeah.
And we also very much understand how incredibly insignificant our contribution to the problem is, right? And how it's just a very small peg in the whole machine. It's, we believe, a critical peg, just like many other pegs are critical. We're not more important than others or less important than others, but this realization that there wasn't anyone targeting this very specific problem that I think is really important, and which other people actually who know this field a great deal better than I do also agree that this is important. So, the combination of all those things is what led me to this. And then in the end, back in 2014, I was fired by the company that had hired me because I was causing too much trouble, I think, internally, having too many opinions. And so I was let go. And my wife said to me, you've been thinking about doing this. You've been talking about this for years. Do it, or you'll regret it your whole life. And my friend, who's an entrepreneur, a Ugandan entrepreneur who I'd worked with in Uganda back in 2002, I called him and I said, what should I do, Paul? What should I do? And he said, you've convinced your wife, you've done 50% of the work. So I was like, okay, let's go, and so that's how it got started. I was also told by somebody, if your project is sufficiently difficult that it's a defendable business proposition, then nobody's going to steal it from you.
Yeah.
And that allowed me, once I realized that, that allowed me to start talking about the
Mhm.
the project, talk about what I wanted to do, and
Mhm.
start exchanging ideas with people instead of keeping it under a bushel, and hiding it for fear that someone was going to steal this idea. And then realizing that, this was just too crazy an idea, too ridiculous, and that nobody was going to try to steal it. And in fact, nobody has so far. And I've been talking about it, and basically saying how to do things. And I don't see anybody rushing into and they may yet, but there are a billion people who don't have water in their house in cities, right? So there's a large market. I mean, there's no question there's enough room for more than one company. And even I would say, the more the merrier. I mean, we need to solve this problem, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so it's a bit of a complicated answer to your question, but it was personal conviction,
Yeah.
opportunity at the moment where I found myself without a job, and with a generous unemployment package from the French government.
Okay.
Important to say as well.
Yeah.
I think it's very important to recognize that. And permission and encouragement from my wife, support from my family.
Right.
And, it allows a man to take a risk that a lot of people feel that they can't take. And I don't blame them for it, because everybody's circumstances are different. And I certainly wouldn't want anybody listening in or, to think, oh, well, I feel like I can do this. Well, everybody's different. Everybody's circumstances are different. And so, yes, being an entrepreneur is one thing, but it's not the be all and end all. You can have a huge impact doing other things.
Yeah.
And, there's this bit of a myth around the entrepreneur, but let me tell you, it's not easy. It's definitely not for everyone.
Yeah.
And it has to be the right time for you in the right moment. And at the same time, it's never the right time. Right? Because there's always, it's like it's never the right time to get a PhD. It's never the right time to buy a house. It's never the right time to get married. It's never the right time to have children.
Yeah.
Because you can always find a reason not to do it right now.
Yeah.
Right? So and yet it's always the right time by definition, right? So it's complicated. The answer to this is very personal, and the opportunity is there. Of course, that's an important thing. I mean, there's clearly a business opportunity. That's also important. I mean, it's not just personal conviction.
Yeah. No, this is pretty inspirational. I mean, I know how hard it can be to summarize like more than 18 years of activity coming together to like form this, and you've been running it for last 6 to 7 years. The personal factors, the professional ones, but I think you did a good job in summarizing that. So, I mean, obviously, this hasn't been an easy journey, Greg. It won't be. It won't get easier, I guess. But what yeah. what have like some of the biggest challenges been? Like, if you, I know there would have been so many, but if you have to, just list the top one, which you still face on a daily basis, what would that be?
So the toughest one, I think, is every utility wants our solution.
Okay.
Except for a couple of utilities in Cambodia and one in Tanzania that told us they didn't need us.
Okay.
Okay. And they have their own reasons for why they didn't feel this way. But every one of the 300 others that I've spoken to wants our solution. The biggest challenge is getting them to actually buy it.
Okay.
Because they don't have money often, or they think they don't have money. Of course, they have all this untapped accounts receivable that we can help them recover. And of course, they have this money. But and then when you're a startup in the water sector, it's not a sector where people like to innovate. A lot of people, and this is not a criticism of the water utility management teams, but they seldom will get congratulated when they took risks that panned out, and they would definitely get punished if they took risks and those didn't pan out. When you've got this startup company from France coming to you and saying, "Oh, you got to do this," it's the reaction is, oh, "Okay, well, maybe I'll go second or third in the line, right?"
Right.
And so finding that one team, MD and his or her, management team that says, "Okay, we're going to do this." That's really hard to do.
Okay.
And we've been lucky, we've found them, you know. Then the other problem that we face is a financial problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to get investors to come into a company where the profitability is dependent on doing business with the government or government-like organizations.
Right.
And it's also difficult when you're based in France to raise money for work in Africa.
Mm.
You know, that's really scary. And a lot of investors are reluctant to do that, or it's just actually outside of their investment thesis. Like they're just not allowed to invest in you by the rules that they've have with their own lead partners. So that's difficult. And then on the project side, you know, the World Bank, the IFC, the USAID, the DFID, all those people, they like to make 5 million and above, pick your currency, checks, right? $5 million, 5 million euros, 5 million pounds. Like that's a nice check. That's small, actually. They like to do 10, 15, 50 million, because that's convenient. And they get a big check and it's, you know. And again, I don't blame them. But a lot of the projects that we're trying to do are like 200,000,
okay,
500,000. And there's very little financing for those projects.
Okay.
Right? Everybody wants there to be innovation, but nobody wants to be the guy who has to, you know, study each one of these crazy innovation projects and take the risks that they'll fail.
Yeah.
Now, to their credit, the organization formerly called DFID, which is the British, they did a special deal with an organization called the GSMA, the GSM Association, where they give them a big chunk of money, and those guys then made small projects.
Okay.
And that is really transformational. And if there's anybody who's listening to us who works for the World Bank or those people, go and look at what those guys did, because it's really essential and it's really critical, not just in the water sector, but for every innovation out there where you need to start small. Because I can't look at you in the eye and say, you know, give me $50 million, it's going to be hunky-dory, right? That wouldn't be serious. Yeah. We're not at that stage yet.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not a crook.
Yeah.
Right? So I can't really take that much money from you, right?
Yeah.
So it's, you know, and by the way, we are raising money. So, you know, we're looking for the end of our financing round. We need another 300,000 euros. So if anybody out there wants to participate, well, we're happy to take them in. Okay. But so, you know, those are the two big problems: reluctance to take a risk, and lack of appropriate funding.
I mean, it's good that, I mean, those are the challenges, but you understand them deeply, and thanks for, you know, sharing that with us, because I mean, listing down challenges, or I think knowing them is one thing, but like understanding them deeply and, you know, understanding them, why is that a challenge for the other side is critical. And yeah, that's a good learning for all of us who would be, you know, listening to this conversation. So thanks for saying that. Yeah.
You know, I used to be really annoyed that these were the problems we're facing, until I realized that, you know, this wasn't those people's fault.
Right. Yeah.
Like, they have their own objectives, which their bosses or their investors have set. And there's only so much that they can do within the confines of the rules that they have to operate under.
Right.
Now, sometimes you find people who are a little more creative, who have a little more leeway, et cetera, but, you know, you can't, nobody's going to jeopardize their job.
Yeah.
You know, nobody is going to jeopardize their livelihood and their family's well-being. Yeah. You know, it's completely understandable. Right. You know, and I would probably do exactly the same thing. So it's really hard to cast the first stone.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so instead, what we try to do is we try to solve the problem, try to fix the problem. So we say, you know, right now what we're telling investors is, give us a $5 million pot of money, and we will do 10 500,000 projects, or 20 250,000 projects. You don't need to worry about it. We'll commit to paying you back X. And, you know, right? And we're telling the utility, you don't have any money, you don't want to take a risk, fine. We'll lend you the money from this 5 million,
Yeah.
And we're so confident that our solution works that we'll take the money generated by the meters themselves to repay the loan.
Right.
And so if it doesn't work, we won't get paid. And you've put no money down.
Yeah.
And that is starting to, it has to make its way down people's psyche and sort of sift through the sponge, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's work.
Lastly, Greg, so just wanted to understand, what lies ahead for CityTaps in, short term, 6 to 8 months, and probably in next 2 to 3 years.
So right now we're very much focused on a few countries in East and Southern Africa. And so that's going to be our focus for the next 6 to 8 months, and get some projects in each one of these countries. Okay. And in parallel to that, develop this financing mechanism that I was just talking about. And so we're talking to banks, to PE firms, to private investors and looking at how to structure that so that it makes sense and that it can be replicable in various different geographies under different, it's tricky. It's definitely tricky, right? So that's the two things that we're working on.
Okay.
In parallel. And of course, as always, this fundraising that we're doing, equity fundraising, with the goal of strengthening the team, because no company can do anything without a team, right? And here I want to make sure that I recognize that none of this would have been possible without the people who work for CityTaps.
Right.
None of what we've achieved. And then in the 2 to 5 years beyond that, is really to scale based on these initial successes. So go from having a $5 million pocket of financing money to a 50 million and then 100 million, right? Because again, that's when you can tap into the money from the IFC and those guys that like to make $20 million checks, right? And then on the commercial side, to expand, back into West Africa, where we originally started and have been sort of taking a backseat recently, and then of course to South America and Southeast Asia. And I expect that, by the end of 2025, we'll be making 50% of our sales in Africa, which is where we started, and about 50% in South America and Southeast Asia. And then as we move forward, those will probably reach 30-30-30 equilibrium. Probably a little bit less in South America because it's a slightly smaller market.
Okay.
When the other thing that we'd be working on is becoming the employer of choice for people working in this sector.
Okay.
It's really important to us that we continue to grow our very diverse team. We have a very diverse team. I'm very proud of it because it's a very deliberate thing that we do.
Okay.
And we continue to provide opportunities for young people. I mean, I'm still young, but younger people, and in the company, and to grow the know-how and to have a reputation, a well-earned reputation, not just a false reputation, a well-earned reputation as the place to work if you're a water professional.
Right.
So that, and if you're a software engineer and if you're a hardware engineer, it's a place where we have impact. It's a place where people are paid well. It's people where opportunities are there, and it's a place where your boss is nice, and the company is managed in a way that recognizes human beings as human who happen to be resources, rather than resources who happen to be human. Yeah. So
okay,
there you go.
No, it's good to know, like you are putting so much emphasis on building the right culture and the team, and like getting the right people on board, because you can't do everything by yourself. You need to be surrounded by the right people on this journey. I
would say you need to be surrounded by people who are better than you. It's very important.
Right.
And I am 100% sure that everyone who works for CityTaps today is better than me at something.
Okay.
I'm better than them at some things.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're definitely better than me at something else.
Awesome.
And that's really important, because Otherwise, you're not going anywhere, right?
Okay.
You're limited by your own capacity. And instead,
Right.
here
Yeah.
you have these people around you, and you're like, okay, we're going to build on this,
Yeah.
and you guys as qualities are going to compensate my weaknesses,
Mhm.
and my weaknesses, my strengths are going to compensate your weaknesses. And as long as everybody understands that,
Yeah.
then you look at the football teams that win the World Cup, right?
Mhm.
They don't always have the best individual players, but
Yeah.
together,
It's a good team.
together it's the mayonnaise
Yeah.
is there, right? And it's a cohesive whole,
Yeah.
and it works.
Awesome.
And that's what's really, in the end, it's essential, because without every company is basically the people that work for it.
That's true.
Otherwise, I mean, it's you have to have the right people, and it's a major challenge as a founder and CEO, identifying your own weaknesses so you can hire people who will compensate them, and also providing enough room for those people to take on the responsibility, and so let it go of that responsibility for your baby.
Yeah.
Right? It's hard, and yet it's absolutely essential.
Yeah.
It helps that I'm a little bit lazy.
Okay.
And I like to give work to other people,
Yeah.
So
That's a blessing.
It's a fault that turns out to be an actual quality.
Yeah. Okay. As a founder, you need to be lazy.
So there you go. Sometimes it's not such a bad thing.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Greg, for sharing all those insights with us. Your story, how it all started, the motivation behind it, the problem, the actual problem that exists. So it makes it like for a water consumer like us, basically everyone, it makes it easier to understand where the problem lies, and how are companies like CityTaps out there solving it. So thanks a lot again.
Trying to solve it.
Okay.
Very, very small contribution to a huge problem, but
got it. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Greg, for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Naman, and I really appreciate it. And good luck with your endeavors as well.
Thank you.